Watch this.
Well, we have our first glimpse of a school choice bill this session, but not the one we were expecting. Seems a renegade representative has some big budget ideas of his own. On the day certain protections were removed for certain athletes, Idaho is moving forward with a resolution to honor a certain team that took a seat instead of taking the court. Another kind of diversity was the topic in another state house hearing. With schools already retreating when it comes to DEI on campus, we could see it fortified in state code.
It's an issue that needs resolved. I think this gives us a starting point when we come back next year to continue to find a solution to that problem, because this problem's not going to go away.
And it hasn't gone away. And it didn't take long for Idaho lawmakers to get situated in the starting blocks this session for when it does come up again with a school choice bill that might actually have a chance of clearing the State House. However, one of those lawmakers jumped too soon, a false start, if you will, and he took off running with his own version of a school choice bill. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. But this possible final lap for vouchers, education savings accounts, or parental choice tax credits, however you want to call it or frame it, it's been in the qualifying stages for several sessions. It all began in the late stages of 2022, one of the last days of the session.
Motion to introduce RS 29865, RS 29894, RS 29245, RS 29616.
And that was the end of a 3-minute meeting right there in the House Ways and Means Committee. That's when Representative Megan Blanksmith took 30 seconds to read off an entire list of routing slips that would be rubber stamped and printed as bills. RS 29567 was one of them at the end there, and it would become House Bill 822. It was a Republican Representative Jason Monk's bill, and the idea was to create an education savings account where 90% of what is spent per student per year by the state and the school districts, which would be about $7,500, 90% of that would go into an account to pay, or for parents to pay for their kid to attend any private school or to cover the cost of homeschooling. So $6,750 would follow the student to a private school. The public school district where that student resides would get $750. And there was no cap mentioned in this bill, so it could amount to tens of millions of dollars. Well, the bill never got a hearing. The next year, in 2023, Republican Senators Tammy Nichols and Brian Lenny joined forces to bring forth another ESA idea. They would call it the Freedom and Education Savings Account Bill, or Senate Bill 1038. And their idea dropped the amount available to follow a student to a private school to 80% of the average spent, or about $5,950, and it would create a parent review commission to implement and administer the program. And they were asking for $45 million, $40 million for the funding, $5 million for administrative fees. But the problem for many senators who took up the bill in a more than 2-hour debate on the Senate floor was the state's responsibility to maintain a system of free public schools.
This legislation takes away from that maintenance, takes away from establishing and maintaining that general, uniform, and thorough system of free, common public schools. It violates my oath, and it violates the Idaho Constitution. For that reason, I will oppose this bill.
Senate Bill 1038 would fail to get through the Senate, 12 noes to 23 ayes. A little more than a week later, Republican Representative Lance Cloud took his shot at school choice. The Education Opportunity Program was introduced the second week of March. And Cloud's bill would also give families 80% of what is spent per student by state and local school districts. The priority would be given to low-income families, but he only wanted to set aside $17.5 million to cover it. House Bill 289 also did not get a public hearing and remained in the House Education Committee. Then 2 weeks later, Republican Senator Ben Adams tried another approach. He brought a school choice tax credit bill to the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. For families with kids in private school or being homeschooled, House Bill 347 would give them money back, $1,300 for the first kid, $900 for the second, $500 for the third, and $200 each for each one after that. With an estimated 22,000 Idaho kids in private school or being taught at home, Senator Adams thought $30 million would be enough to cover the cost of the tax credit. So it wouldn't be taking money out of the school budgets, but still, several committee members had concerns with what else it did not do.
Is it your intent that there is no accountability as far as kids being held to a standard for grade level and so on and so forth, or is it just free and unregulated?
The accountability comes with
that parent investing in their kid's education that they're already doing. They've already made that decision. I don't want to make it more regulated.
My email box has blown up over the last 3 weeks, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of people say they don't want to spend public money on private education.
Which is why that bill never got out of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. So jump ahead a year later, and the tax credit idea would carry over to March of 2024. House Bill 447, the brainchild of Republican Representatives Wendy Horman, Jason Monks, Scott Grow, and Doug Ricks, would get printed and it would get a public hearing. They called it the Parental Choice Tax Credit, and it would refund families $5,000 per kid, or $7,500 for students with special needs, to help them pay for educational materials, even transportation, or tuition for private school. They put a $50 million cap on it, on what would cost the state $40 million for the tax credit and a separate $10 million for low-income families to apply for a grant should they choose to participate. But for the same reasons as mentioned before, money coming out of the general fund, a lack of accountability, and the fact it looked to be unconstitutional, House Bill 447 failed to advance out of committee by an 8-9 vote. Okay, so 2 weeks later, Speaker of the House, Mike Moyle, he decided to let everyone know school choice was not going to die. It was going to be heard from again. So he personally stepped up and introduced House Bill 743.
This RS is one that probably is not going to go anywhere. I know there's a lot of people that are concerned that it will, but let me explain. I have always felt that school choice was important. It's an issue that I think needs resolved, and it's an issue that's not going to go away, and I want it resolved.
Speaker Moyle knew it was too late in the session last year to advance any such bill, but he just wanted to make sure it was still fresh in lawmakers' minds that it will be addressed again this session. So that does bring us to this session. And Joe Parrish joining us here. We've already heard from Representative Horman, who is spearheading the latest school choice tax credit bill. However, she has yet to introduce it officially, hoping to get more people on board before they kind of bring it forward. But not everyone is on board with that kind of team play, right, Joe?
Yeah, there was a few surprised reactions at the legislature today, Brian. So the first school choice bill of the year is here, and it appeared in a very surprising way. It is called House Bill 1, and it is titled the Idaho Parental Choice Tax Credit, and it appeared in the list of House legislation to begin the day, which means it didn't get a first hearing in committee or public testimony. That's because, as we have learned, it is a personal bill, meaning it never went through a committee and was simply read across the House floor after some technical filings at the State House. From the floor, though, it essentially goes to sit in a file cabinet. So personal bills, they're not new, and really they're just an idea that you get read across the floor. They're not meant to really go anywhere. No surprise that this legislative session was starting with a surprise because of a freshman lawmaker, Representative Clint Hostetler, making a splash in his first week. And I reached out to him to chat about why he did his personal bill and what his idea was. Didn't hear back from him. Hopefully we will soon. But speaking for itself, his legislation, again, House Bill 1, it's proposing of using up to $250 million to pay for $9,500 refundable tax credits for qualified education expenses per student. Similar to other ideas, just a bigger number than the $50 million proposal that we heard about earlier this week. So again, this is just one lawmaker's idea. They followed the rules. They're allowed to do things like this. But his legislation echoes a theme that lawmakers will continue to battle over, and as we just showed you, have for years: accountability. We heard from Governor Little in the State of the State address on Monday saying that the Idaho way to do this is fair, responsible, transparent, and accountable. What does accountability even look like? Students in a public school, for example, they take tests in part to show how they're doing, and the results of those tests help indicate how schools are using millions of tax dollars. The legislation, House Bill 1 and others like it, so far, no mention of any testing or evaluation concepts. Only some room for financial audits by the State Tax Commission if they somehow get a tip that a family isn't using money for qualified expenses. This is not unique to Idaho, though. Former Arizona Governor Doug Ducey rallied lawmakers on Monday this week at the State House, and he was the governor of Arizona when their education savings accounts, a similar program there, he signed it into law. Here's what he had to say about accountability.
The accountability is with the parents. That's where the real accountability is. But I don't think testing should be the only way to do this. And why don't we trust parents and trust freedom, give them the dollars available, and let them educate their child the way they see fit and see how that works.
There are families that love Arizona's system, but there are those that criticize it for a lack of public accountability, return on investment for taxpayers, even criticizing because they don't have to publish if anyone graduated from these homeschools or these private schools, and they never know what the money's going to go to. So this is also a similar situation that we had with JFAC co-chair Wendy Horman this week, who also says, have you heard other people talking about, Brian, that accountability, it should be with the parents. So as we highlighted in Brian's tour through history of this, one of the holdups of this from lawmakers and the general public is accountability. With this conversation starting this way and at least two versions floating out there, the question is already out there, is this doomed to fail?
It's worth pointing out a lot of the people we heard from in that tour of history are no longer in the State House.
Very true.
We'll see how it advances. So another early session legislation has to do with accommodation for the Boise State women's volleyball team. Republican Representative Barbara Ehart brought forth House Concurrent Resolution 2, basically a pat on the back for the volleyball team standing up for women's rights in college sports and forfeiting games against a school that allegedly had a transgender player on its team. The foundation of women athlete protections is Title IX, the federal law that prevents discrimination based on sex in school and in sports, meaning women and girls must be allowed equal access in schools receiving federal money. Last spring, the Biden administration expanded those rights to LGBTQ plus students, which is why that's what happened when a slew of states then took legal action to stop that from being implemented, including Idaho, with Governor Little even signing a proclamation last fall saying, well, Idaho would never follow it. Today, a federal judge struck down those new Title IX rules, removing federal protections for transgender athletes to compete on a team that coincides with their gender identity. So that is now all gone, just as Representative Ehart's resolution heads to the full House. Hunter Funk has more on today's committee hearing.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The motion is carried. It will be done.
It may be just a resolution commending BSU's volleyball team's actions, but one that also holds weight for people on both sides of the aisle. Resolution sponsor Representative Barbara Ehart says this resolution is more than commending the volleyball team for their forfeits. It also calls on the Mountain West Conference and NCAA to revoke policies allowing transgender athletes to compete.
Women simply cannot compete against men, and that's how it is.
She was joined by the co-founder of the Independent Council on Women's Sports, based out of Nevada.
It's much broader than just fairness in the sport. Safety in the sport.
And Riley Gaines, a former University of Kentucky swimmer and current activist for single-sex spaces, including joining a legal battle with the NCAA over trans athletes. She spoke about her experiences swimming against a trans athlete.
He and I raced actually in the 200 freestyle, almost impossibly enough. We tied, meaning we went the exact same time down to the 100th of a second, but despite tying, I was denied the trophy by the NCAA because they claimed it was necessary for Thomas to hold the trophy when photos were being taken.
Two people testified in favor, including an Idaho mom we talked to in October, April Cheney, whose daughter is a college volleyball player.
I've seen the tears. I've seen great frustration on why this is even being dealt with at the player level. This is something that the governing body should be handling. Mountain West Conference and NCAA should have taken care of this so the players could play.
She wants safety for her daughter and fairness and integrity built back into women's sports. The one person testifying against the resolution was Nixon Matthews, a former legislative candidate and openly transgender man. Matthews says the current NCAA regulations and testosterone thresholds are already strict enough for NCAA trans athletes to compete, and that this resolution sends a discouraging message.
We hear this. Our community hears this and they feel this because it's impacting our day-to-day lives, saying, you are other, you don't deserve to live fully. And so even something like this, it's a statement. And it is the first statement that the Republican legislators have decided to make in the 2025 legislative session.
It's why Representative Brooke Green voted against the resolution.
This does perpetrate a message that is still hurtful to a community who feels marginalized.
And that vote for the resolution followed party lines with two in opposition, which now means it's headed to the House.
Okay, so there's still lawsuits out there that are dealing with this too. So those also have to be resolved. So we'll see how those go forward.
Yeah, 100%. That Riley Gaines is also a part of some of those.
And two Boise State athletes are also a part of this lawsuit against Mountain West. To be clear, the Mountain West, in order to be part of the NCAA, Got to follow the rules the NCAA puts forth.
Right.
So that's how it works. All right. Thank you very much, Hunter. So the end of last year, we saw multiple Idaho public universities close or restructure their diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and programs. They did so in anticipation of potential legislation that would happen this year, and because the Idaho State Board of Education was planning to pass a resolution that would ban DEI offices on college campuses. Boise State did it, Idaho State University did it. They all closed their offices before the resolution passed in December. University of Idaho, though, they planned to do the same, but waited until the resolution passed to do the same. Now, with campuses having already shut those offices down or restructured them, would Idaho lawmakers try and pass laws on DEI in higher education, or would new laws be focused on DEI in different areas? That was a topic brought up today in a hearing, and Aspen Shumpert was there to talk about this DEI task force. And you kind of got an idea what at least one lawmaker, was thinking about this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note we won't really know until session starts and we get an idea of what people want to propose. Today, we did hear an idea, and we're going to stick with DEI in higher education. Senator Bill Tays, who also sits on the state's DEI task force, is showing support for the State Board of Education's resolution that passed in December by today sharing with his fellow committee members a bill that would essentially do the same thing.
Institution of higher education in the state of Idaho, or any employee, appointee, or committee acting on behalf of an institution of higher education shall A, establish, sustain, support, or staff a diversity, equity, and inclusion office or department, nor hire an individual to serve as a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, nor contract, employ, engage, or hire an individual to serve as a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer or consultant.
In addition to banning DEI centers on college campuses, Senator Ben Tays says the bill would also not require students to take any DEI-related courses. He also says the bill would allow for any funds that were supposed to go to DEI centers and officers on college campuses for fiscal year 2026 could be used for scholarships to reduce the cost of tuition for in-state students. Now, Senator Melissa Wintrow, who also sits on the committee, did push back on the bill's intent, specifically bothered about the time and money that's been spent on this issue.
As I would rather, I think, focus on more bread and butter issues to help students through college. So I'm going to scrutinize this a little bit more later, but big picture, just troubled that we're down this path again and not, talking about the real needs that the students have.
So what comes next is this exec committee is going to talk about this introduction a little bit more and give Tays a little bit of feedback on the language, and then essentially would recommend what he would then take to a different committee to formally introduce the bill.
Okay, I know there's a little bit of support behind this, but we're also hearing from people who are tired of the fact that these culture wars are continuing and being the focus of the beginning of another legislative session.
Yeah, and there could be more to come. There could be more DEI bills introduced. I think that's something we'll have to watch.
All right, if the resolution by the state board isn't enough, I guess. All right, thank you very much, Aspen. Mandatory minimum fine for marijuana possession is again being passed around at the State House. Last year, they tried it with a $420 price tag. This time, it's not as high and not as giggly. Abby Wilt has that and more in today's 411.
I don't know if we've ever sent this many firefighters outside of state.
In just one day, we went from 0 to over 100 firefighters going to help with the devastating California wildfires. The firefighters from 25 different agencies left Nampa this morning to drive down to Southern California. They'll get there tomorrow afternoon and stay for 14 days to help protect structures on fire lines.
This RS proposes to set a minimum fine for misdemeanor marijuana possession. That's 3 ounces or less.
So there you go. This year's edition of the marijuana mandatory minimum fine was officially introduced today in the House Judiciary Rules and Administration Committee. Representative Bruce Skog tried the same thing last year, but that bill never got past being printed. This new one got the go-ahead to be printed, so we'll see if it goes further than the last. You could be going to Disneyland. Alaska Airlines now has a new direct seasonal flight from Boise to Orlando, Florida that took off just after 9:30 yesterday morning. But they're only offering this nonstop flight for about 3 months. It will depart Boise 2 to 3 times a week through March. And that's the 411 on the 208. I'm Abby Wilt.
All right, people got a little wordy with their text messages today. We're going to get through as many as we can, like this one from Carol. Says, it's interesting. San Jose State's volleyball player was on the team for several years before all this happened. NCAA regulates this closely, so the trans athlete does not have an unfair advantage. This has been blown out of proportion by people who are just using it as a political ploy. Worth saying, though, neither the school nor the conference nor NCAA has said San Jose State has a transgender player on their team. That's just been something that's been alleged at this point. As important as it is to give some protection to the LGBTQ people, still more important is to protect girls and women who have been true to their born gender. No woman should have to be forced to lose to a trans person because no one created an other league within sports. For now, aren't there intramural sports leagues to allow for trans people to play in them? There are, but it's not the same as playing for NCAA titles. Just wondering how many legislators have kids in private schools that are pushing to get this bill passed. Thank you, Bob. I don't know the exact number, but I do know a good majority of those that we saw introducing said bills do have kids either in private school or they are homeschooled, but they do have to proclaim that, Rule 80. If you wish to homeschool or send your children to private school, it's your choice, but it must be on your dime. We sent our kids to a private school. We never expected taxpayers to foot the bill for us. We budgeted the expense as a personal expense, says Mark and Kay in Middleton. Accountability should lie with the parents, huh? You mean the same parents that don't want to be held accountable for what books their kids might see in the library? There's Dave in Boise. We'll see you tomorrow.
Continue with us and watch free now on the KTVB Plus app everywhere you stream.